Good afternoon, everyone who joined this discussion. And talking today about Ukraine electricity networks. Spoiler: that networks were the part of the energy which was affected most of all during these 2 months of the war. Ukraine is the biggest country in Europe, and correspondingly, energy system is very big and very sophisticated. And when it was built as a part of a Soviet power system, the key priority for the system was reliability. And these principles have helped Ukrainian power system to be reliable for during 3 decades after Soviet Union collapsed. However, on the other hand, there was a problem. That was a problem of underinvestments, because tariffs, prices for electricity transmission and distribution, these were far from being market-oriented. That's because of a long tradition of populism and paternalism, especially the prices for utilities. And this underinvestments affected grids and networks in a bad manner, that these became more and more inefficient. Sometimes reliability was not so good as it was expected, but still power system, power grids are very reliable despite all challenges they faced. And sure, after economic crisis that followed Soviet Union dissolution, country faced decreased level of production, this and depopulation. All these affected energy consumption, and that was making using grids more and more expensive, and this just has deepened the problem of underinvested in the grids. So today, just I would like to draw your attention about how the system works during the period of the war. It is very reliable because the only problem was that some customers were left without power supply because energy networks were destroyed by shelling. There was a serious challenge, attacks on nuclear facilities, particularly on Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the biggest one in Europe, and Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which is under decommission, but still they possess some risks. And attacks which were prevented, attacks against hydropower plants. In total, these 2 groups of power facilities provide more than 60% of our power generation in Ukraine. Last year, Ukrainian renewables provided more than 13% of energy generation, but during the war, only third part of these facilities are now operating, and I believe that about half of them are destroyed or damaged, and the future of this is unclear, because most of Ukraine's renewables are located in south and in east. So Ukraine has spent billions and billions of dollars. There was serious debates in recent years regarding renewables, and now a huge part of this just suffered. There is still no problems with gas and coal, and also what contributed to the stability of the power system was that because of the war, because of decreased volumes of production, power consumption has fallen for 30-35%, depending on the week. Some thermal power plants are not controlled by Ukraine, so especially the big power plant in Luhansk, and one hydropower plant is not controlled by Ukrainian authorities, and Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is still controlled by the Russians. However, Ukrainian personnel is maintaining the station. And another challenge that we faced that sure that during the war not everyone is paying their bills. For instance, in Kiev, payments are just only 50%. In West, it's higher because the situation is much more stable, and in eastern regions, clear that these are much lower. So in general, the war affected energy system, especially networks, in a few ways. First of all, there was lower energy demand. The second, which is serious, a very serious impact, that was destroying of networks. Mostly that was about distribution grids. So as of yesterday, still 1,100,000 of customers are without power supply, of 17.5 million customers of total. Mostly these are in Kiev region, so the areas that now Russians left, and a huge number of these customers are in the eastern parts of the country. And sure, this affected, and this is affected and will affect energy policy of the country, and especially when talking about networks. On February 24, when the war started, Ukrainian power system was passing the first day of a stress mode called isolated mode. There was a very short period of time when Ukrainian power system had to work without any imports or exports because of a long process of integration Ukraine to European power system. So as earlier, Ukraine was a part of a single power system that united former Soviet Union states, and in early 2000s, Ukraine started a process of disconnecting from Russia, from Belarus, and with a desire to connect to European states. However, at that time, the process was blocked. Russians were blocking because, first of all, Ukraine is a big market, and it's always a chance to sell electricity in Ukraine. However, Ukraine was self-sufficient and was exporting electricity, but that was a serious leverage of political influence on Ukraine. Russia would be happy to have Ukraine connected to Europe, but to have Ukraine connected to Russia, because in this case, Ukraine would become a bridge for Russian electricity export to Europe. But we see how dangerous is deep energy reliance from Russia. And in 2002, 20 years ago, only a small part of Ukrainian power system was disconnected from Ukraine and was connected to European to NSOE. That was a very small part called Burштyn Island, which was only about 3% of total Ukraine's power generation. And that only small island was only exporting electricity to 4 European states, Poland, Slovakia, Romania, Hungary. From today's perspective, the problem that the biggest, we can say that the only generation that was thermal power plant using coal, and the rest part situation, the rest part was connected to Belarus, Moldova, and Russia. But situation was with carbon footprint was much better because of more than 65% of the electricity there was produced with low carbon nuclear and hydro. So in 2017, Ukraine signed an agreement of and a roadmap of the process of disconnecting from Russia and connecting to NSOE, to the continental Europe system. So Ukraine was planning to become a part of big united European power market. And on February 24, there was the first stage of the last stage of all these tests and examinations. But so, and everyone was guessing about what's going to happen, how this stress mode will be passed by Ukrainian power system. immediately, Ukrainian energy ministry and the system operator took a decision not to connect back to Russia and Belarus because of the war. So Ukraine had to work in isolated mode and requested INSOE to join Ukraine earlier, because according to plans, this had to happen in 2023. Despite all odds, Ukrainian power system demonstrated stability, so we managed to keep the frequency, and a few weeks later, after that, NSOE joined Ukraine. So, and from the next year, we're going to be a part of the European energy market. Sure, that's opening new horizons for Ukraine. As of today, because of capacities, we can import only 4.3 billion kilowatt hours to European states. But according to existing plans, in 6 years, that's going to be 28. So we have to expand. And that is opening a good horizons, because still we have strong nuclear power sector, and we have strong hydropower sector, and the renewable sector was developing. So that is opening for Ukraine good horizons for exporting of local carbon electricity. But sure, first of all, we have to cope with Russians who don't care about low carb or anything this way. So my 12 minutes have finished. I have finished. Thank you. Thank you.
So also thanks a lot to Andrian for this excellent introduction and talk. And I will focus on the synchronization process, the emergency synchronization of Ukraine's, and one should add also Moldova's grid with the Central European, continental European electricity grid in the context of the Russian invasion. So, okay, here we go. First of all, a brief overview on what this synchronized area are in Europe. We have we have a network of European transmission system operators, NSOE, in Europe, and there are several areas. The largest area is the regional grid of continental Europe. Here in blue, we already see Ukraine and Moldova added to this map, and a couple of smaller areas that are not, or in some cases not yet synchronized with this continental European grid, such as the Baltics, that are supposed to be synchronized with the continental European grid in 2025, and also the Nordics that are not synchronized. The UK, which has also left, obviously, since Brexit, the European network of TSOs, NSOE, and the Irish grid with Northern Ireland. And the regional group of continental Europe developed since the post-war, post the Second World War, we would have to add probably by now, from 1958, where France, Germany, Benelux states, Switzerland, and Austria formed the first group of synchronized grids, and it then successively expanded throughout the decades, from 74 with the Iberian Peninsula, Denmark, Italy, and Yugoslavia added, and in the 90s, 95, Central Eastern Europe, so Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, 97, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, so also 3 North African countries that have been synchronized. And then, as Andrian already mentioned, in 2002, a small part of Western Ukraine, the Burштyn Energy Island, has been synchronized to the continental European grid. And then 2004, Romania, Bulgaria, 2010, Turkey. And since 2022, since this year, we have the emergency synchronization of Ukraine and Moldova. So there has been primarily an east-west expansion of this continental European grid, which, is actually in some instances quite delicate, because it stretches so far from west to east. And let's a little bit of background maybe on what synchronization means from an engineering point. I'm not an engineer, so I'm not very qualified to speak about that, but just to get an idea, such a synchronization of AC alternating current grids is much more sophisticated than linking with direct current back-to-back stations. And a disturbance in one area of the grid can propagate through the entire synchronized grid and have severe consequences in quite distant areas of the grid. So there needs to be a lot of fine-tuning and coordination between transmission system operators in all these different countries to make sure that the whole synchronized area works together and maintains a stable frequency and a stable grid. Actually, in a few instances in the past, there have been some events where this regional synchronization has been split, desynchronized for very brief periods, such as in 2006, where in Germany there has been an overload of a transmission line, and then the transmission line tripping, so stopping to operate, and then the area has been split in 3 desynchronized areas for I think 1 or 2 hours before everything was in stable operation again. And there were blackouts all the way in Spain, so quite far from Germany, just to get you an idea how delicate the system is if it's not operated correctly. And let's zoom into the Ukrainian grid and its connections to its neighbors. Here we see the connections between the Ukrainian grid and its Western European or Central European neighbors. As you can see here, the Burштyn Energy Islands, so that little part in Western Ukraine is shown in green, which has been synchronized with the Central Continental European grid since 2002. So actually, Ukraine already has quite a lot of experience with synchronization, and there are already transmission lines in place that have been used for the last 2 decades to Slovakia, Hungary, Romania. So this emergency synchronization is not completely unprecedented, but obviously it has been very much sped forwards. So let us actually look at a brief overview of the timeline, and Andrian has already mentioned this, so I'm going to be relatively brief. In 2006, this process has already started, where there has been a cooperation agreement between Ukraine and Moldova with the European EU transmission system operators, and an expression of interest for synchronization. And then about a decade later, from 2014 to 16, there was a large feasibility study that concluded that synchronization is feasible, but there was a kind of a lot of measures that had still to be taken. In 2017, there were agreements for interconnection with tentatively scheduled for 2023, with the possibility for another 2 years of extension until 2025 if the measures are not taken quickly enough. And as I said, a catalog of measures. So then these measures have been implemented over time. And actually, so in November last year, there was a large study on so-called static and dynamic stability. And the conclusion, or the main conclusions, were that static stability has been confirmed, and dynamic stability has also been confirmed in principle, with some minor needs for adjustment to adjust, to do oscillation dampening and loop flow control. So some technical installations that still had to be put in place and addressed for synchronization to take place, but this is a matter of would have been a matter of probably a couple of months, and it was on track to be synchronized in 2023, most likely. Then there was actually scheduled for early February 1st this island mode or isolated mode. So the first of 2 scheduled tests where Ukraine and Moldova would run in isolation, disconnecting from Russia and Belarus, as Andrian explained. And then the plan was to disconnect for 2-3 days, do a couple of series of tests, then resynchronize with Russia and Belarus. This test has then been moved to late February. Actually, on at least we have been told from our contacts in Ukraine, on request by the Russian transmission system operator, to late February, February 24, a date we all remember by now, which was the day when the Russian invasion started. And So then resynchronization with Russia has not taken place. The Ukrainian and Moldovan grid have been in island mode for about 3 weeks instead of scheduled, I think, 2 or 3 days for these tests, and has been operating remarkably stable in island mode. And we have then seen the emergency synchronization on March 16. So what does emergency synchronization mean? It basically means we don't have a full market integration. So there are no commercial exports for now between exports and imports between Ukraine, Moldova, and the neighboring countries. But we have a technical synchronization, which means that the European neighbor countries can, for example, provide grid services to stabilize the frequency and if there's a disturbance in the Ukrainian grid. And there can be some technical exchange of electricity, so imports and exports to balance off the grids, but no commercial exports for now. So in order to have a market integration, a full commercial integration, there are just a couple of steps. As I said, there's still some technical issues that have to be addressed, probably over the next coming months, I assume. Ukraine also has to join a couple of market platforms, adopt additional EU legislation. For example, this so-called REMIT legislation, the Regulation on Wholesale Market Integrity and Transparency, which, amongst other things, prohibits insider trading. There's some very stringent data transparency regulations, obligation for markets participant to register, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of making sure that the regulatory standards of the Ukrainian electricity market are in line with the EU market rules. And then depending on the speed of this implementation, we might see a market integration sooner or later, obviously, depending on how quick these steps are taken. But I would be personally relatively optimistic that both the Ukrainians and the EU side is working very hard on this to make this happen rather sooner than later, especially in the current circumstances. So let us actually think about, sorry, I think this doesn't switch to the next slide. What the impact of the war means for synchronization, or more broadly for the electricity system. There has been a very targeted destruction, as Andrian explained before, of distribution grid, of I think in some instances also of the transmission lines by the Russian invaders, which has been continuously repaired when it is possible to reestablish power for the population. And also power plants have been targeted just before the war. For example, there has been shelling of the Lugansk thermal power plant, which is now under control by the invaders. And also railway infrastructure has been targeted, which is quite the issue for coal shipments to some power plants. Actually, some power plants, some thermal power plants have been switching to natural gas instead of coal because the shipments of coal has been obstructed in a few instances. And other infrastructure, such as a gas, this is, I think, a gas pipeline in Donetsk Oblast, oil facilities, so all kinds of energy infrastructure, or also other infrastructure. This is a fuels and lubricants warehouse, and Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is now under control by Russia, but at least administratively, but there has been shelling in the immediate vicinity, or actually on the area of this nuclear power plant, which did not jeopardize the nuclear safety of the unit, but there were some concerns of spent fuel that was on the area that might have easily been hit, because spent fuel is stored on the area without any kind of strong protection against shelling, obviously. and all other kinds of infrastructure, the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, and I mean, the destruction in Mariupol in general, the entire infrastructure, as you obviously know, is very heavily targeted. So kind of a very targeted destruction of energy transport, buildings, and all kinds of infrastructure. And well, in this context, it's quite remarkable that the Ukrainian electricity system is still functioning relatively stable and providing power, unless there's a local disconnections in the distribution grid. And yeah, I think Ukraine has demonstrated that they are able to operate their electricity grid in a very stable and reliant way in very extreme circumstances even.
I'm really glad that we discuss Ukrainian situation in the energy sphere together and brainstorming in some way on this issue. So what I would like to tell you that actually the situation in energy sphere in Ukraine is unprecedented even for European countries. It is very hard to predict how it will develop in future, and so that's why we are preparing for the different scenarios. Meanwhile, I would like to highlight that the integration and synchronization with the NCOE for Ukraine is very, very important nowadays, and it also will be good for us to start the work on market coupling of Ukrainian and European markets. There are some current initiatives that are aimed at this point, and we hope that this will also be conducted in the future years as well. So I really appreciate that Rouven and Andrian had the great overview of technical aspects of the synchronization. And from my side, I would like to stop on the legal framework and from the other perspective, the political framework. So Ukraine has already implemented the third energy package of European Union. And actually, according to the decision by the Ukrainian government in December 2021, Ukraine took obligations to implement the fourth energy package of the European Union. This is a brave decision of Ukrainian government, because we still need to understand where we will get the resources for this implementation. And again, the war has completely changed the landscape to it. And that's why Ukrainian government need to reshape their efforts of this implementation and realign the main topics of the discussion. So what I can tell you for sure that Russian-Ukrainian war will have a significant impact on the energy sphere of the whole Europe. This topic caused the broad discussion of the new paradigm of energy dependency, of supplies, of resources, of generation of self-consumption of electricity and of all the goods. And this will have long-lasting consequences of the energy security of the whole Europe. First of all, we see that the dependency on oil, on gas and coal now is very dramatically influences the political relations between countries, and the solidarity of the European Union leaders to ban the coal, and now it's connected with the oil as well. This will change the market relations slightly with the new players from around the world that will substitute the amounts that have been previously bought from Russia. From the other hand, we have the the strong developments of the Green Deal in European Union, and Ukraine also has the plans to implement its own Green Deal, which have been under development since 2019. And this situation just will speed up the implementation of new initiatives connected with the Green Deal, as well as the renewables that I'm particularly stick to. So it is very simple to understand that if there is no coal, no gas, no oil, no fuel cells for nuclear power stations, still we will have electricity and heat from renewables. This is completely natural to the country. And when some regions have been the DCOs and TCOs facilities have been destroyed. Meanwhile, there are some examples when local municipalities got the electricity from solar power stations. For instance, it was in Tokmak, and this was the only source for people to have the electricity in their homes. So this means that this district distributed generation will become the very hot topic for the further discussions, as well the implementation of energy storages and the hydrogen production. These points will completely reshape the energy system of the whole Europe, and I think, and also I hope the whole world. And according to Irina, there will be at least $850 billion needed to increase the speed up of energy transition as well. And what else I would like to say that we have the priorities for now for supply of goods and equipment to Ukraine to maintain grid in operational mode. And there are strong initiatives by the Ministry of Energy of Ukraine with energy community, the task force that have been initiated for support the grid. And we are very grateful for every European country and for UK and USA and other strong support that we have already received to our side. And this is what we actually need. And to our suggestions, the further integration with the NCOE is a matter of life for Ukraine. And these topics that have been highlighted by Rouven, that this will be the opportunity to for commercial export of electricity as well for Ukraine, as we usually have this extra electricity in our grid. And this will also open the income for state budget with these operations, and also will somehow positively influence the trading balance of Ukrainian state in current circumstances. The other point concerning the NCOE synchronization is that Ukraine now is very dependent on the external help in electricity in emergency situations, as the consumption of electricity is changing mostly daily. On the daily basis, and it is I really admire with the work of Ukrainian dispatching services, who actually do a miracle every day for Ukraine to remain on grid. But what we have mitigated, at least, that the synchronization reduced the risk of blackout in the country, and reduced the risk if there come such a blackout, we will come back to the normality. So this is a very positive side for Ukraine, and as you have seen, this is not the spontaneous decision. This decision was prepared for years, and a lot of technical work have been already conducted by the staff of Ukrenergo, first of all, who have implemented dozens of recommendations. And actually that's what we are now, and we hope that this the way that we need to do in future, we will also cope with it with an excellent results. So thank you for your attention, and it was nice to attend your workshop.